Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to be here this morning and to have Debbie giving us her time today. If you have any questions, you can add them to the chat box. She will have some questions at the beginning that you can send directly to Debbie. And then any questions for Debbie, she will answer at the end of the presentation. Without further ado, it's a pleasure to introduce Debbie Dobbs. Debbie, take it away.
Hey, thank you so much. Welcome. Let me get my screen up and going and we will get started here. Hopefully you can see everything now. There we go. Okay, so today we're talking about how to be your child's best advocate in a collaborative manner. Please write down my website, my Facebook page, my phone number. If you have questions and you want to email me directly, you are welcome, to do so at our office's email address. Normal disclaimer, nothing that I'm going to tell you today should be construed as medical or legal advice. I am not an attorney or a physician. I am a lay advocate. And everything that I talk about today is accurate as of the day of the presentation, and it's just for informational purposes only. So if any of you have seen me speak, you know who this is. This is my son. And goodness gracious, this picture was 21 years old now. This was the day that he was born. And I always say I got that lovely loud silence. He was not breathing. This was them intubating him. And so he's, an adult with disabilities. And so I have 100% had him as my motivation. A little bit about me. I worked over 20 years managing and consulting for medical practices prior to getting into special education advocacy. I am so happy that I had that experience because boy, you need to learn to navigate that world effectively. I received training from the Georgia Advocacy Office and various other organizations regarding educational advocacy. I do work with families one-on-one to file for funding, such as Katie Beckett and Medicaid waivers. And I have worked with families individually as well as an educational advocate, attend meetings, review records, provide consultations, so on and so forth. I love to do these seminars and webinars because knowledge is power. I help to run the North Fulton Autism Support Group. I've sat on a board of directors for nonprofits. I was a big brother, big sister match for over 12 years. And now I feel really old because she's an adult with 3 children of her own. Again, I encourage you to follow me on Facebook, where I am frequently posting information on what's going on in the advocacy world. So what are we going to talk about today? So we're going to talk about, why you may have barriers for effective advocacy. I'm going to go into, what are some of the tools that you need, understanding the process, meeting preparation, because I think that's one of the biggest things of barriers. People don't know. They don't know what they need to do so they can effectively advocate. And I'm going to give you some meeting and mindset strategies to help you for pervasive advocacy. So I want you guys to put your thinking hats right now. Right. So a part of the lines when we were talking about, what is this talk going to be? And Jade is like, Debbie, we constantly get questions of how do I advocate and not be perceived as that mean mom or mean dad? So think about that. I'm going to go over several reasons here on this slide and the next slide, but I want you guys to put you can do it in a personal chat to me, of any of the reasons that you feel that you have a problem effectively advocating. Okay, so number 1 is an inherent non-confrontational personality. So, somebody who may consider themselves conflict avoidant. And again, advocacy does not mean conflict. So I think everybody needs to have a paradigm shift. And when we talk about being an effective advocate, It doesn't mean that that there has to be nastiness. It may mean that we disagree, and it may mean other things, but and there may be some conflicts. Not everybody's going to agree on things, but that's still okay. I've also found in working with families that different people from different cultural backgrounds have their own paradigm, their own cultural norms. So I've spoken to some families who have said, we as a part of this culture never question two people, doctors or teachers. You're not allowed to question them. They know what's best. So the doctor always knows what's best, the teacher always knows what's best, and you're not supposed to question them. You know, the laws of IDEA state that you have to have meaningful participation and that you're an equal participant in meetings. And so in order to be an equal participant, you kind of need to have an opinion. It's not just one-sided of what one person thinks is right. So that may be a barrier. If there are traditional gender roles, you know, I mean, I often see that when we think about gender roles, people are like, yeah, no, we don't do that. You know, I've been taught not to question, you know, people in authority. Lack of knowledge is a huge barrier, and I'm going to be focusing on a lot of that today. I find that when people, like when you don't know, I know personally, like if I don't know what we're talking about, I'm going to have a hard time coming in and providing an opinion. Like if I was chit-chatting with somebody about football and, oh, you know, was this a good or a bad game? I don't have a whole lot of knowledge about that, so I would have a hard time giving an opinion. So it is important for you to become an expert on as much as you can, on laws, on the rules, on your child's needs, on the process, what's available, norms, acronyms. There's so much out there, and if you're overwhelmed, it's like, oh yes, you should be overwhelmed because there's a whole lot of information out there. And you just have to take it one piece at a time and bring people with you to meetings to support. Again, if you have anything that is kind of burning at you right now that you think, oh, Debbie, you're not hitting one of the barriers that it is for me to be able to effectively advocate, shoot me a message in the chat, and I will add this as well and talk about it. You know, advocacy is a new skill and it makes you uncomfortable. So, you know, it's not easy. And it's hard, and you have to learn how to do this. It's like flexing muscles. So it takes practice. I hear all the time from families, I am so worried it's going to be taken out on my child if I advocate. So I ask people, do you feel educators go into the field of being an educator because of the fantastic money and because it's an easy job? No, they don't. They are typically going into the field because they love children. I don't inherently believe that educators are doing this job because they want to take things out on a kid. Are there always going to be some bad eggs? 100%. But automatically, right? This is such an automatic response that I hear from people. It's probably one of the top things. I'm worried that they're not going to be nice to my kid. You know, if I, you know, in their mind become difficult. You know, something else is that, you know, they're afraid people thinking negatively about you, right? That you're, you know, the mean parent, you know, who's never happy with anything. I've heard that, you know, I've heard, you know, school teams say, you are never happy with anything that we do. Listen, parents are not perfect. Individuals on school teams are not perfect. It is not uncommon that I see that teachers can become defensive and take things personally when really it's nothing personal about it. So it is not uncommon that I see people shift the blame to the parent. If there's something that's kind of inherently wrong with the system, the classroom, the supports, what have you, it's very easy to blame the parent. That doesn't mean that it's right or accurate, but it does happen. I have a lot of families who want to be friends with the staff, who believe, coming into the school year, that this teacher is my friend. Um, and we're going to have a friend relationship. At the end of the day, you may become friends. That's 100% possible. But what is most likely is that they have a job that they're doing, and they need to be a professional in that job. And you have a job that you're doing as a parent. If somebody does not advocate for your child, it's on you. You're the one who has to be your child's voice. And if you don't do it, other people may not do it as well. And I've seen this, frequently, that, parents don't understand the barriers, right? So, educators and classroom teachers in particular, are often told things, right? They don't get to make all of these decisions of what's going on in the district. And they go to trainings from the district, and they are told these things. Now, what they're told is not always accurate or legal, but they're told, and they have a job to do. So they're following their job's descriptions. And they're worried that if they go against these things, they're worried about their job and the impacts that it can have with them. I can't tell you how many times that I've had teachers reach out to me privately after meetings, or to parents as well, or before meetings, and say, hey, as a heads up, I'm not going to be able to say this at the meeting, but you need to know X, Y, or Z. I can't tell you how many times that's happened during a break in the hallway or what have you. And it breaks my heart for the student, because this individual, this teacher, wants to be able to say something. They want to tell somebody, parent or me, but they're like, you can't tell anybody that I say it, and I can't say it at the meeting. At the end of the day, how is that hopeful, right? So again, I don't know that a friend would do that, right? This is somebody in their role, and I think we have to remember what those roles are. And you have to be the best advocate for your child. Somebody just spoke that an additional barrier not to fight is parents are in survival mode, have no extra energy, finances for a lawyer, or are depressed. I 100% agree with you on that. And I saw this especially during COVID and schools being closed and all sorts of horrible things happening. And when people are not able to stand up for themselves, or so exhausted, because let's be real, early, in 2020, it was, not having therapies, outside therapies, medical care, access to education, everything was difficult, just finding toilet paper, right? And so we were in fight mode, as parents, for every single thing. And at the end of the day, we have to pick our battles, right? And so if we're exhausted, if we're tired, and, it's not common that we hear no. I hear no all the time. As an advocate, I'm not afraid to hear no, because I often know that no can get to a yes. But the emotional energy to be able to do that and push through that is real. I do want to, again, remind everybody that you don't do it, who is going to? I want to give a couple of examples of where I saw that, families were not able to advocate. So, it's not uncommon that I'll receive calls from families where their child may have been injured, that specifically they know that school staff are not following the IEP. Some real serious things are happening, and they call me because they're afraid for their child's safety. And for example, I received a call, a few weeks ago. And so we didn't have very much time, frankly, left in the school year. This was a student who was in a preschool program. And next year they were going to be going into a different program just due to the nature of the programming. And so we were brainstorming, what do you need to do? If you're ever going to get your child out of a classroom, and particularly something that is going to be potentially a dangerous situation, you need to be loud. You need to blow things. This is something that a light needs to be shined upon. And the family didn't want to do it. And even though their call to me was, I'm afraid to send my child back to school, I'm afraid for their safety, they were not willing, for whatever barriers that they had themselves, to be able to do this. I do think that there was a cultural barrier. They did share this with me. And they were also worried about other bandwidth, because they didn't have a plan B for their child in terms of childcare, because there was, both working parents. So they made the decision to be quiet. They were also afraid of, specifically said that they were afraid of retaliation. They said, what is going to happen if I say something? Well, number one, they already know that their child was been injured. They already know that they were doing things that they weren't supposed to be doing, that was putting their child in precarious physical safety situations. And that they tried to address it, informally, by having conversations, and they were just continuing to do what they wanted to do, even though they 100% should not have been doing it. And the family decided not to do anything. So, I'm not going to make judgment. It's their child, right? And they're making a decision. But they had a very strong impetus, and what they wanted, right? What they wanted was to know that their child was going to be safe. But they weren't willing to take the steps in terms of advocacy to ensure that was going to happen. Okay, so, frankly, I expect progress for all children with IEPs, and I think you have to go in with this mindset. So a lot of what families don't know, don't understand, are thinking about is, how do we, what is the process? How do I get what I want? So I'm giving you a whole bunch of links here. Wright's Law, if you don't know about Wright's Law, Google them, go to their website, whole bunch of free information, some great books that they have on there as well. Become familiar with the Georgia Department of Education's website. Understand parent rights. What are the different eligibility categories, the rules, the manuals, the forms, ESY? Like, this is common, right? So parents are like, my child, needs ESY. And I'm like, well, why? And they said, well, they're just starting to learn this new skill, and it's a really important skill, and I don't want them to lose it over the summer. But the IEP team just told us that, they didn't qualify for ESY because there was no regression. I'm like, well, that's not the only reason you can qualify for ESY. So, the family didn't know that. They were not aware of that. But if you go on the Georgia Department of Education's website, they'll give you all of the different criteria for ESY and all of the different reasons and on how you can qualify, and have an understanding that it's not a one size fits all, that it doesn't mean that you just have to do the 4 weeks that the school is offering at a center-based program, that the I in IEP stands for individualized. And if your child needs more weeks or in a different setting, that can happen as well, based off of their needs. So I encourage you to learn these things. It's a lot. It's a ton of information for sure. But it's a lot, and you need to take it bit by bit, piece by piece. If your child with a disability, is going to remain in public school, they have a right to be in school up until they're 22. So you have a whole long time to continue to learn and to grow, and to understand these things. Also, if you're confused, you want clarification, the school district tells you one thing and you're like, this is not what I'm seeing written down in the rules on the DOE site, you can call the Department of Education. You can hire an advocate. I am often asked, Debbie, would you please help me work through a problem? I don't necessarily want the school team to know that I'm working with you, but would you work with me behind the scenes? So you may be able to find people who can help you and provide you guidance so you can better understand the process. Parent to Parent of Georgia is also has a wealth of information and fact sheets that they put out as well. Also want to talk about parent mentors. So not every county, but many counties have parent mentors. What you need to understand is that they are employed and have a paycheck by the county. They are not quote unquote advocates. So many parent mentors are amazing. I've had many as friends over the years, and they can do some wonderful things in terms of helping families. So oftentimes it's a navigation process, and many parent mentors are excellent and knowledgeable and skilled at being able to help with that. But it is a difference between a mentor and an advocate. What do you need to do to help you prepare? So get outside opinions, evaluations, expertise. Oftentimes, right, I said people are trusting what the school is saying. Well, that may be from their perspective, but you can also have another perspective and other experts. Ask for copies of their drafts and their documents and their materials, a week in advance, so you can look at this, so you can see what's changed or different. If you are going to, these meetings, number one, they oftentimes are way too fast. They try and do this when I'm going to a meeting as well. And I'm like, we can't effectively and meaningfully participate, if you have a 45-minute annual review for a kid with multiple disabilities and is very complicated. It's just not meaningful and not possible in most cases. So don't let them rush you, and have an understanding of what are you going to be looking at. It's so overwhelming. There's a lot of information that they send you, and you need to digest it. Sometimes you need to research it. You need to Google it things. You need to ask your private therapist, and you can't do that unless you have the documents. If they are mentioning proposed placements or changes, make arrangements to schedule an observation. Ask your district. Every district kind of has their own policies on this. But for you to be able to meaningfully participate and consider if a recommendation for a placement is appropriate for your child, you need to be able to see it and have an understanding of what it is and what it looks like. So, ask for that for certain. Write up your parental concerns, and I mean write them up. Number them. I always tell all of my clients, don't bullet point them, number them. It makes it easy for people to reference what's working, what needs to be improved upon, what's your vision. If at all possible and when appropriate, please send it to them in advance. If you're going to be making requests, for example, I had a meeting, this week, and, there was missing information in the progress report. They provided updates to the IEP, but there were certain sections that were missing. I didn't dump them on that when we were sitting there at the IEP meeting in terms of parental concerns. We gave it to them in advance so they could provide responses and fix things, right? Don't wait until the end and until your meeting to make your request. This is a common mistake, that people stay quiet. They don't get something. They're supposed to be receiving something. They're afraid to ask for it. Never be afraid. Just ask. Shoot an email and say, hey, I don't understand this. Can you explain this to me? Can you please provide this to me? And you need to work on your own effective communication skills as well. What are your child's strengths and weaknesses? All IEPs talk about this. You yourself need to have an understanding of this, so you can also provide input into the IEP. Write down your own proposed goals and objectives based off of your child's needs, and know and have an understanding that you can ask for a district's expert to attend a meeting. Recently, I was at a meeting for a kiddo, and they were struggling in terms of reading programs for a child with an intellectual disability. And so they brought in the ID coach after that meeting, and we're looking at some different reading interventions. They tested some things out. We met back again. This is a process. Just because the teacher doesn't know the answer doesn't mean that there's not going to be somebody else who has that training and expertise. I advise people, don't ever go to a meeting alone. Take a friend, take an advocate, a member of your child's provider team with you. It's a whole lot of information. It is serious. And I want you to have support, just somebody, a family member. It's difficult to do this on your own. If they can be taking notes, providing assistance. Try and discuss and work out issues in advance in the meeting. Like I said earlier, don't wait until the end. Doing some things not inside a big old huge group of people can be less intimidating, particularly, if you're somebody who's conflict avoidant. See what you can work out, have these conversations with them. Officially, everything is always an IEP team decision. But if you can have some of these conversations and preparations and things in advance, and let team members know what you're looking for. Like, for example, if you're worried about a certain aspect of your child's communication, and you're not seeing much progress, or if you have a concern about that, don't wait to the meeting to bring it up. Shoot your SLP an email and ask if you could, have a conversation, or, let them know what you are, concerned about, so it can give them some time to think about solutions to what you may be concerned about. Understand that the annual meeting is a serious meeting, and you should be fully prepared. Treat it as a business meeting. A lot of times, due to, for example, childcare constraints, I'll see families bring other children to an IEP meeting. Don't do that. Please don't do that. It is so stressful for you. It's stressful for the kids to be sitting and waiting around. You cannot focus on the task of helping your kiddo prior to a meeting. Also, I didn't have this as a point. I have a lot of clients who have twins. Please don't schedule both of their meetings on the same day. Even if it's with the same team, or mainly the same team of people, it gets very confusing. It's a lot. It's emotionally exhausting to go through a meeting for one kid, nevertheless two. So please, give yourself a break and try not to do that. In talking about your parental concerns, also talk about what's working, what you want to communicate with the team. If you have something in place now and it's working, it's not necessarily a concern, it's a bad thing, but the concern is, I want this to continue. I want this moving forward. You need to have the freedom to be able to effectively be able to communicate that with your families. What needs to be improved? What's your vision for your child? Becoming the expert. So join listservs and Facebook groups, disability specific and advocacy related. Sometimes people can give you some ideas that you hadn't thought about yourself of, oh, maybe this is something that I can ask for. As a parent, you have a very limited scope. You only kind of know what's going on with your kid, or maybe you've chatted with some friends and seeing what's going on. As an advocate, I get to see many districts, many schools, many ways of dealing with things. And so oftentimes people just don't know what the possibilities are. I do want to warn people in terms of what you read online. Always take it with a grain of salt. I see a whole lot of misinformation out there. Speak to your private therapists and doctors. Just because they recommend something doesn't mean that the school has to abide by it, but talk to them. They're also experts of individuals with disability. One thing that I had on the last screen is also on the DOE's website, you can look at what are the grade level standards. And so look at that, have an understanding of what are they working on for other kids in that grade, and what is your child not doing? That could help you in terms of determining what may need to be some goals. If you've already completed that grade level, your child should have that skill. Observing typically developing children, doing research. A really great website is the National Center on Student Progress Monitoring and Research Institute on Progress Monitoring. And you can learn more in terms of what is that progress monitoring. I always say it's all about the data. It's all about the data. So make sure you're requesting copies of their education records, including that raw data on their IEP goals and objectives. You need to have an understanding of how frequently are they taking data. Is it very variable? I know one county, they give progress reports every 4.5 weeks. And on their progress report, guess what data? If they say your child's at 80%, it's the last data point. It's not all of the data points that they've taken during the month, but it's just the singular last data point. Most people don't realize that. So you need to make sure that you have an understanding of what the data is and what it means. Review your meeting notice. Who is coming? What's the purpose? You're not surprised. It makes it really difficult to be able to say, oh, do I need another expert here? Is there somebody else who we need to have at a meeting? Generally speaking, for most kiddos, annual meetings are about 3 hours. I've seen many that things are smooth sailing, not a whole lot that's going on, that 100% can be done in a shorter time period than that. But you need to make sure that you're not rushed. These 45-minute meetings, not okay. Review your child's grades, organize and analyze the information. You need to be looking at things, right? You can prepare graphs and visuals to explain your point. If your child is not making progress in reading, your advocacy strategy is data. Using data is not confrontational, it's factual. You give somebody a visual to show them based off of your data, because they've provided it to you. This child, looking at this chart, has regressed. Again, it's not confrontational. It's saying based off of your data, this child is showing regression. What we're doing now isn't working. We need to be doing something different. So data is everything. schools are required to provide scientifically based instruction that meets the unique needs of your child. It is not a one size fits all philosophy. Unfortunately, I find that's often the barrier that families face, is to truly make their IEP goals individualized. On more than one occasion, school teams have sent the parents the draft of a wrong child who may be in the classroom. And I always find it to be very interesting and amazing how often goals are the same. I even had one provider say, yeah, no, our speech goals for this group is this. And I said, wait a minute, we're talking about what this child needs, not necessarily what the group needs, and they may have some similar needs, but let's talk about what this individual's child is doing this. You know, many of these people have their own barriers. The educators do, that is for sure, but the law requires the IEP to be individualized and again, meet the unique needs of their child. So there are plenty of resources that are out here and available. And again, these are things that you can start looking at and researching and having an idea and an understanding of. Yeah, so many people feel like this, right? When they go into an IEP meeting, and it's difficult and it's hard. But it's you know, I encourage people not to think of it as battle mode, but think of it as business mode, right? Be prepared. Think of it as your doctorate dissertation. You have your data, you have your evidence, and you need to have a point of view as well. So many of our families and parents are so nervous and anxious. I know I again sat through many years of IEP meetings personally myself, and it is anxiety provoking. What's going to happen? What are they going to do? What changes are going to be made? Just the nature of itself that I've got a kiddo going from elementary to middle school, all of these things. It's hard, but please don't jump to the worst conclusion. So, know that when you're writing your goals, this is things that I'm certain, most people have heard before. They need to be SMART goals. And if you're not writing a SMART goal, then it's really not worth anything. So, again, I was at an IEP meeting recently, and I was like, yeah, I know this kid. I've been with them for many years. This is like the third year that they've had this teacher, great relationship. But I read the goal and I'm like, I think I know what you're talking about here, but we need to add some clarifying language so other people understand as well who is not familiar. Think about your child moving from Georgia to Hawaii. Are they going to be able to follow it, right? And is it measurable? One time I was in a meeting and I just couldn't believe it that they just did not want to write the goal measurable. And listen, have an understanding that sometimes there may be an incentive to do that because it allows them more wiggle room. But what happens is when you don't have a specific and a measurable goal, then it means that the data means nothing, right? Johnny will improve in reading. Well, what does that mean? Where are you starting? What does improve in reading mean? Are you talking about comprehension? What type of comprehension questions? Factual or literal? So the data, oh, he's improving in reading. He's at 80% now, met that goal. Well, it doesn't mean anything. So during the meeting, please record the meetings. Tell them that you're going to be recording in advance. Again, it doesn't need to be confrontational. I cannot effectively take minutes, listen, ask questions, write my own notes, and be able to catch everything. I know from a personal perspective, I've listened back to my own, IEP meetings, for my family. And I was like, I was so mad coming out of a meeting. And then I went back and I listened to the recording and I was like, oh, That's what they said, right? Or it clarified something for me. And so please, that is the only way of truly having accuracy. And not you after the meeting and once you get a copy of your IEP, because not every IEPs are updated live during the meetings. Not every district is doing that. And so oftentimes there's errors or things are not captured that you agreed upon in the IEP. Don't get involved in a he said, she said sort of a thing. That takes conflict out of things, right? People are like, I don't want to have conflict. Well, great, don't. Go back and then you'll have a recording and you can listen to a recording, and that's the information. If you stop the recording or note in your IEP, hey, we're at 45 minutes here, we're discussing goals, you can jot down those times and it'll make you easier to go back to find a certain section of the IEP, to find what you were talking about. Bring your records with you. Oftentimes people don't know your child at the meeting. And individuals, you may feel that they're not seeing your child in their best light or not seeing their potential. So sometimes we have to change paradigms, and we may need to bring pictures or videos which highlights their strengths in various settings. Sometimes people need to see the possibility. And so that I find is an effective way of doing something. It is a collaborative process and you're an equal part of the team. And so, what does that mean? During the team, being professional, courteous, don't interrupt, listen. Most importantly, I want to highlight this point. I probably should put it on the top or made its own slide. Ask lots of questions. The families that I find who are non-confrontational, who are afraid to advocate for their children, who don't know how to kind of get their kids' needs met, who are afraid of being that kind of mean parent, or ones who are not always willing to ask questions. So you can, who, what, where, why, when, how, right? Explain to me. I don't understand this. Somebody is saying that here's this goal. Walk me through it. Can you tell me what it'll look like? Again, state facts and use your data. And you are 100% allowed to disagree. So I don't know about you, but I have many relationships in my life. And maybe with a partner, with children, with friends, with parents, you are allowed, you have the permission to disagree. It doesn't mean you're going to get your way, but you can. And you need to let people know if you disagree with them. And you can ask people, what is your rationale? Why are you saying this? It may enlighten you and you may come around to their side. But by you saying what is your opinion, you also may enlighten somebody else. I see this all the time with families when they find their voice and they come into the meeting and they say, I don't want X, Y, and Z because, and they explain their reason. I see all the time people perk up and they're like, oh, I hadn't thought of it that way. It's okay. You can do that. Also ask if there are any other options. That's a very powerful question. They say, we're going to do it this way. Say you don't really feel very comfortable with that. Ask them, are there any other options? Is there any other way that we could possibly consider doing this if we didn't do it that way? I find that's often, a good avenue to have a collaborative conversation. What are your rights? Well, you're allowed, and it's required that your child receive a free, appropriate public education. Again, free, appropriate public education. But appropriate's not the Cadillac. It's not the best. It's not at that standard. Sometimes I say, It's the old clunker that may break down between point A and point B, but you get there. It may be inconvenient. It may be a little bit warm and the air conditioning may be out, but eventually you get there. So, what is the definition of appropriate? Recently, not so recently now, but within the past few years, the Supreme Court, came out with a ruling that talks about, appropriately ambitious in light of the student's disabilities. So it's not uncommon at all. This is probably one of the most common things that I see is less goals, less services, less supports, less standards, less levels of mastery, a bar being low. Okay. So most of the time, families are, we're going to use this word, fighting, right? Advocating for more. So, that's frequently what I see. So, to get more services, oftentimes you have to get more goals. So people are like, I want more OT or PT or speech. Well, we have to see if there's a need, get the more needs in there, and then you get more goals, and then you may get more services. Or I want ESY for my kid. It's really important that they have ESY. Well, we're supposed to write IEP goals, again, that are appropriately ambitious in light of the student's disability. And that they should be able to achieve, that is a team consensus that they're able to achieve over the course of the next year. But what I see is oftentimes these goals are and so you end up at these annual IEP meetings and they're like, child met all the goals, doing great, mastering, absolutely no problem, not seeing any regression here. No, the child's not qualifying. And you're like, but the standard was so low. So have an understanding that that is not uncommon that I see in terms of the paradigm. What are some other things that you can ask for? You can ask the school to provide, parent training. You may need some information on OT or PT or behavioral supports or communication. If your child has an augmentative communication device, for example, they can and should help you learn how to use it, so you can also use it with your child at home and over the summer when they take it home with them, and they should be taking it home over the summer. It's their voice, their communication. Talking about, you can get copies of books, social emotional goals and objectives. What about social skills groups or access to, a counselor or facilitated instruction on some of those needs? Transportation, transportation is a hot topic. Transportation is a related service. And so it's something, if this child requires it, it can be added. So that is something also. Meaningful daily, weekly, monthly, what have you, parent communication. This does not mean that you have a right to go and walk into your child's classroom every day and discuss things and say, I want to sit and chit chat with you. But you have you need to be able to meaningfully be able to communicate with the people who are working with your child. Privacy. You don't have to agree to let private providers speak to the school. Consult with an advocate on the pros and cons. There's other ways of doing that without providing a release of information, such as a notebook that goes back and forth between the parent and the parents providing that information. Document everything inside of the IEP, prepare those concerns in advance, written on a flash drive. Like I said, number them. It makes it very easy for people to reference. Give it to them in advance when you can. Take copies if you're in person at a meeting, bring it to them so people can actually have a copy if somebody didn't get it. Read back if they're taking meeting minutes, prior to the end of the meeting for accuracy. Districts are, number one, not even required to take minutes. Which again is another reason why you want to record meetings, but minutes need to be accurate and be representative of what you are discussing during the meeting. And so it's not uncommon if when I'm in a meeting with clients and somebody is taking minutes, and I'll ask them, particularly if it's an important part of the discussion, can you please read back this portion of the minutes? I want to make sure that we have it accurately, documented. You can and should be asking questions. Again, who, what, where, when, why, how. The law requires that you be a meaningful participant in an IEP. If you don't finish on time, you can reschedule and finish at another time. Do not let them rush you. I understand. We want teachers in the classroom. I get it. IEP meetings have to happen, at a time and location that's agreeable to everybody, right? So it's not that, they call you and say, you have to come tomorrow at 10 o'clock, and that's the one and only time that we have for your annual meeting. No. That can be worked on. If the new IEP isn't created by the time the old one ends, your child will still get services according to the old IEP. You need to understand that. People always say the IEP expires. Well, it doesn't expire per se, but people use that language a lot. And services will still continue while you're working on and developing and agreeing upon what should happen with the new IEP. You're allowed to disagree, but they do not have to give you what you want. They don't have to. People always say, well, if you don't agree to it, I see this all the time on boards. If you don't agree to it, they have to listen to you. Nope. So let's say that they want to, there's a proposed placement change and they want to move your child to a more restrictive placement. And you're like, no, I don't like it. I disagree. I want them in the current placement. Well, if you disagree, you can get that on record, but unless you follow other procedural and legal avenues, what will happen is your child will go to that more restrictive placement. So you need to have an understanding of that as a parent, which goes back to understanding what are your parent rights. And what could you do if you disagree? And what are some of the avenues for you? Now, what is your documentation? If it didn't happen in writing, it didn't happen at all. So if you're having conversations with people, create a paper trail, follow up with them. I know it's helpful for me because I forget things. I mean, you forget timelines of things. And so thanks so much for chatting for me today. This is what I understood that we talked about and what was agreed upon. Let me know if I got anything wrong. Follow up with them. It's not adversarial. It's factual. Hand deliver you certified mail for important documents. If there's, very important documents that you need. Keeping a journal or calendar, noting calls and delivery of documents. And, I just spoke to somebody recently, who was struggling with transportation, and their child had a one-on-one aide. And I was like, and the aide has frequently not been there. I'm like, well, what does that mean? How often? How long has this been going on for? Well, if they were keeping a journal or noting it in the calendar, and documenting these things, they would be able to answer it, see if this is, a pattern. And, frankly, that's a violation of the IEP because it's a related service that is put into the IEP. Understand your child's unaddressed needs. I spoke earlier about a private evaluations. I do think that this is important and you can document it. You can make requests of the teams and teams can consider, that's their legal obligation to consider all information that's presented to them. Doesn't mean they have to accept it. Make sure that they have all relevant documentation in advance, just like you don't want to be thrown all sorts of things, right? That's one way of being collaborative. Right? Giving people an opportunity to digest information. I always say, treat other people the way you want to be treated. Find out what are the credentials of the people working with your child, and who are doing the testing. Be informed of who is doing what. We have a lot of waivers going on in our state that they are allowing, but it's problematic, if your child's, not making progress. Be organized, be prepared. Listen, I hate paper, and this world is all about paper. So go digital, scan things, document things, find a way for you to have access to this and keep copies of everything. If they're sending home, a stack of papers every week on your child that you have to sign and send back, this is one of the things that I did when my kiddos were little, and I bought a beautiful scanner that could scan and could scan duplex and did all sorts of things for me, personally. And it was like one of the best things that I did, because it made my life so much easier. But you want copies of that. It's not uncommon that I'm asking a family, has your child shown progress? Is their child, having difficulties? Sometimes, families have like a daily behavior chart, and schools send it to the parent and they want them to sign it and then send it back to them. We'll keep copies of this, and you don't have to have paper, scan it, right? Or take a picture of it with your phone and keep it in a folder. As long as it's in an organized format, so you can go back and look at and track, right? You may need to be making one of those graphs for your child to be able to show the team, doesn't look like we're making progress here. I always tell people, don't write on an original copy, certainly unless you have a scanned copy of it. Keep original files, and one if you're traveling to meetings with. Make sure you have all documents. You can ask to review all of the school records, and, also request copies. Most families, I suggest you do this on an annual basis, so you have an understanding of your child's educational records. While they are not going to give you copies of, you can certainly review them. So if you don't really understand something in a test that was done, you can ask to review those copies of those protocols. Again, at the end of the day, this is so critically important. You are your child's best advocate. You're their voice. If not you, then who? Who is going to do it? Who is going to stand up for them? I, literally lost sleep with that family that I spoke to you at the beginning of the meeting, and their child was injured, and the family had real fear about, and were keeping their kid out of school, but they couldn't get to the point emotionally to be able to advocate for their kid. Knowledge is power. That's why I went through a whole bunch of information, which if I were you, I would be completely overwhelmed. What do you mean Debbie wants me to learn all this stuff? Wait a minute, this is way too many resources. It's a lot. But just having the knowledge that it's out there and that there are resources for you, you can start to look at it. And, we all have to hit the fire points first. So it's not uncommon that I have families who have more than one child with disabilities. And parents, frequently moms, will come to me and say, Debbie, I feel so guilty. I feel so guilty. I didn't look at this. I did not look at the progress report. How could I miss this? How could I miss? I heard this yesterday from somebody. How could I miss that they did not take data on this one goal for 5 months? How could I not see this? Well, they had a lot going on with their family, and they were putting out other fires. Listen, we can all do the best that we can do, but just that there's information out there, knowing that you should be looking at the data, right? That's going to empower you. That will help you make incremental changes to advocate for your child. Again, documentation is key. Using facts, not opinions. I often see in a parental concern document, there's too many opinions in there, right? Sometimes parents assign blame. We can't assign blame. But if you're using a fact and not an opinion, that will help you kind of stay away from those lanes and frankly keep it professional. I'm not saying you can't have opinions. Of course you can, but you want to be really careful in terms of what you're saying. Like I would never want somebody to say, I know you did this because, well, you're making an assumption, right? But you can say, okay, I see that you did this. I have concerns with this because, and then you can talk about what your concerns are. So those are your opinions, but don't make presumptions and assumptions of what other people are doing and why they're doing it. You have a right to disagree, and you have legal protections and avenues to pursue if desired. But these are things that you need to know and have an understanding of. And these are things that you can do. I frequently, have conversations with parents about what they are. And it's not uncommon that people, for whatever reason, are making choices and decisions not to pursue them. And that's fine as long as you have an understanding of what you're doing by either an action or an inaction. I always say, if you lie down and allow people to run over you, they will continue to do so. And I truly believe that. And I see it every day in advocacy with clients. And when there are people who repeatedly do that, and are put into positions where I or you or many other outside observers would normally think that a parent would speak up and say, no, this is not okay. And these families have a very hard time doing that, and oftentimes they don't. It kind of gives permission to allow people to treat you that way. So I think, this is something that you just need to keep in mind. So, this is all about balance, right? It's a process, not a point. We can ebb and flow in terms of what are we pushing for or what are we not pushing for? How vigorously do we want to, advocate for that? And again, it doesn't need to be confrontational. It could be factual and based off of data. But if somebody is gaslighting you, and it's a two-way street. The school teams also need to be collaborative. And frankly, sometimes they're not. So you have to learn to find those relationship balances. Again, if you have any questions, or if you're needing assistance, you are welcome to reach out to us. The easiest way is often via email to office@debbiedobbs.com. If you call our office, it'll give you a message it's easiest also if you send an email. We get such a high volume of calls, and oftentimes something can be answered quickly with an email, or we need to be sending you written information anyhow, or let you know if this is something that we can provide assistance with. So I hope that I have empowered everybody to get more skills so you can effectively advocate for your child. I wish for everybody here that you find your own voice, your own inner voice, that becomes an outer voice, so you can speak up at meetings. Jade, if you want to stop the recording, we can stop, and then I have some time for some questions with people.